Chapter 108. Old friends meet but don't know each other. Gong Dian is the deputy commander of the Grand Inner Waiting Guards, a close vassal of the Son of Heaven, and a member of the imperial class. He is the younger brother of Yi Chong, the son of the Yi family, the #1 martial arts family in Qing, and is himself a rare expert of the 8th rank, and in terms of combat strength alone, he is much higher than Cheng Jushu, whom Fan Xian killed in the chaos. Fan Xian had killed Cheng Jushu with a knife that day, but he had taken advantage of the other party's lightheartedness and his own sneak attack on the fishy head of the treasure weapon in hand. If both sides really let go of the battle, I'm afraid that Fan Xian's chances of death were much greater. In the face of the palace cannon, Fan Xian is unable to find any good way, and not to mention the fight does not win the other side, even if you can win the other side. Does he still dare to do with the palace? A drop of sweat dripped out from Fan Xian's forehead, and his heart kept shouting, 5 bamboos wronged me, 5 bamboos wronged me. If it wasn't for 5 bamboos fainting the guards in the first place, Fan Xian wouldn't have been able to enter the Temple of Celebration at all, and there wouldn't have been the many stories that came afterward. But for Fan Xian, the crisis at hand was also a result of this, and of course, it was impossible for Fan Xian to really blame his uncle. He was just taking advantage of this maniacal shouting to relax his mind. Gong Dian smiled and took a step forward, his mellow voice resounding, "This postulant, what a coincidence today." Fan Xian pulled his sister, who was blissfully unaware of what was going on, backward and piled on a smile as he responded, "Unexpectedly seeing you again, my lord." At this moment, his mind was racing. Warner had once said that the nobleman in the Temple of Celebration on that day was His Majesty, so Gong Dian's duty should be to guard His Majesty's left and right, and at this time, Gong Dian appeared in the tea house, so I'm afraid that the Emperor should be here as well. While thinking in his head, his eyes swept over Gong Dian's thin but towering shoulders, and saw a middle-aged nobleman drinking tea on that table, occasionally raising his head and frowning as he glanced this way. Fan Xian's heart was shocked, but his face did not show anything, and said with a bitter smile, "This lord, why do you put on a show of stepping through the iron shoes and finding no place, and getting the whole thing with no effort at all?" That day outside the Qing temple offended adults, but Small also coughed up blood for a few days. This is considered to have made amends. Treading through iron shoes, 2 sentences, is deliberately said to that nobleman to listen to the fresh witty words. Unexpectedly out of Fan Xian's expectation, the other party did not react at all. "Take this person." Gong Dian didn't want to alarm his master, and ordered in a low voice. The 3 guards on either side of him forced their way forward on command. Once they saw the other party's momentum, Fan Xian had a girl with him. Knowing that he would not be able to escape, he frowned and ravaged his body, actually attacking Gong Dian first. Gong Ding was not angry but happy, waved his hand to let the guards retreat, and spread his 2 hands like an eagle fighting a rabbit. His knuckles were withered and powerful, directly clasping Fan Xian's pulse. Fan Xian, although there is nothing subtle moves, but these small kung fu is 5 bamboo hammer out of the instinctive reaction, strange and incomparable twisting of the wrist, fingertips in the Gong Ding's vein on a stroke, arm suddenly long with Sen gas suddenly locked the other wrist. And at this time, Gong Dian's pair of iron hands had also firmly controlled his wrist. The 2 were surprised at the same time. 2 exchanges or just a contact will immediately lock each other, really a very inexplicable thing, as if calculated each other's reaction. Surprised as he was, Gong Dian said with strong confidence, "Gather your hands and be captured." Fan Xian hadn't expected a hard fight with the palace's head of guards, and was only harboring other thoughts, so he frowned and said forcefully and incomparably, "It's not yet known." He let out a muffled grunt, and the snowy mountains at his back waist heated up, and channels of flooding heat erupted from there, attacking the other man's body along his arms. Gong Dian frowned, seems to notice the teenager's true chi, that kind of overbearing momentum, but at this time behind is the master, naturally will not give way to half a step. The light in his eyes appeared, softly shouted, "The body contains decades of majestic true chi transported to the palm." The 2 interlocked arms have been loosened, double palms on a place. After a muffled sound, the green bamboo tea store was swirling with energy. The tea-drinking nobleman frowned, seemingly without any martial arts protection, and Fan Ruarua, behind Fan Xian, also had her legs weakened, almost falling to the ground. Several white lights flashed, and the guards drew their swords and rested them on top of Fan Xian's neck. Fan Xian's arms were so sore and limp at this point that he was unable to resist, nor did he think of doing so. Gong Dian coughed twice and put his hands behind his back, and then looked at Fan Xian with a slightly different look in his eyes, saying softly, "Junior, after not seeing you for a few months, you've improved again." A trace of blood flowed out from the corner of Fan Xian's lips, but this trace of blood made Gong Dian think of the person in the dark room across from the Temple of Celebration, and he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart, not knowing whether he had done the right thing today or not. This time, it was obvious that Fan Xian had lost, but Gong Dian was not as relaxed as he appeared to be. Except for that nobleman, no one noticed that his hands behind his back were trembling, and the domineering Fei Tru Qi that Fan Xian had attacked into his body was still in his meridians, scraping and scraping them like small knives, and it was only after a few moments that he gradually calmed down. Able to write and fight, the world seems to have produced quite a few such young talents lately. The nobleman looked at Fan Xian, whose neck was under the knife, but whose face did not change color, and exuded a trace of an appreciative smile. Gong Dian knew that this master was most appreciative of talent. Fearing that he would let himself be released again like last time, he hurriedly walked to the side of the tea table, and in a low voice respectfully explained why he wanted to arrest this person. The nobleman frowned for a moment, then but gradually loosened, those eyes like deep pools even gradually brightened. He looked at Fan Xian, slightly narrowed his eyes, and said softly, "So it was the teenager from that day." He then said softly, "Gong Dian, that expert you said was able to capture and kill you with ease, has this matter been told to anyone?" Gong Dian was ashamed to say, "Just secretly visit, no results, so did not report, please." "Forgive your lordship." The nobleman coldly said, "Forgive me, but this matter is not allowed to mention again, or all the door are chopped." Gong Dian's heart flinched, cupped his fists, and responded. The two spoke extremely softly, and even Fan Xian, who had exceptional ear power, could only vaguely hear a few words, not being very clear about what they were saying. "All go out, I want to have a few words with this teenager," the nobleman coldly commanded. Gong Dian was stunned, thinking to himself that although his lordship held the world in his hands, he was powerless, so how could he dare to leave him alone with this teenager? The nobleman seemed to have guessed what he was thinking and said with a slight pause, "Gong Dian, stay, the rest of you retire." "Yes." Although the guards were puzzled, they didn't dare to say anything at all and hurriedly withdrew outside the tea store. Fan Xian's neck got free and twisted somewhat comfortably. At this time, Ruarua ran up to him and pulled his hand. Thinking of the previous dangerous situation, anxious tears nearly fell down. "Concordance Lang Fan Xian, disrespectful in front of the imperial court, do you know the crime?" "I don't know what the offense is." The conversation Fan Xian had imagined didn't happen. The nobleman simply sat on the edge of the table and looked at himself with considerable interest. The nobleman's gaze seemed much softer than before, lightly but carefully brushing over his face, which made Fan Xian feel a little uncomfortable. The nobleman opened his mouth and said softly, "Young man's family, who are you?" "This lord, we are from the Fan family. We went to the field yesterday to rest, and today we were greedy to see the scenery, so we balked at traveling here. I don't know why your servant is making things difficult for us." Fan Xian had calculated in his mind that calling the other party lord should be more appropriate. Hearing him reply, Gong Dian's heart was shocked, and only then did he realize that the person he was trying to arrest was actually that Fan Xian who had killed the 8th-ranked expert, and thinking that Fan Xian's father, Sinan Bo, was the master's beloved and close confidant, and that in his hands he held some power that he himself was not very clear about. Gong Dian thought that he understood why his master had earlier given strict orders as to why he was not allowed to divulge the matter of that Zonsure-ranked expert, and slightly embarrassedly threw Fan Xian an apologetic eyes. The nobleman smiled and said, "You are Fan Jian's son?" Seeing the other party call his father by his first name, Fan Xian was even more certain of the other party's identity, and spoke back more and more respectfully, precisely. The nobleman nodded and said, "This is a misunderstanding, so don't hold a grudge." Fan Xian did not expect the other party to be so kind, and was stunned for a long time before coming back to his senses and saying, "I don't dare, I don't dare." The nobleman added, "You've been in the capital for a few months now, how have you been?" Although he did not understand why the other party's status should care about himself, but this kind of opportunity Fan Xian would not miss, thinking about the troubles of these months, said with a slight hint of decadence, "Living in Kyoto, it's not easy. It's not like the hometown." "You mean Tanyu State?" "Exactly. What are the benefits of Tanyu?" "Although Tanyu State is remote, but the people's hearts are simple. As long as you don't harm others, no one will harm you, unlike after entering the capital, no matter whether you are willing or unwilling. There are always some things that will find their way to your head." The nobleman didn't seem to think that the young man would be so direct in his speech, and smiled after being slightly stunned. Kyoto's prosperity is unparalleled in the world, and naturally, its difficulties are also unparalleled in the world. But with Lord Fan's protection, and now that Mr. Fan has a reputation as a good writer and a good soldier, I think that he should be able to live a more comfortable life in the capital in the future. Fan Xian, such as listening to the Jade will spandex voice, if not always in disguise, at this time cannot wait to kneel down to say thank you for the decree, and then in the capital to make a big fuss, the so-called son of heaven's golden mouth and jade words. But his face is still a calm, softly replied, "I hope so." The time was already late, the nobleman had a lot of things to do, so he was about to get up and leave, and before he left, he looked at Fan Xian twice more carefully before he exuded a satisfied smile and said, "See you again in the future if you have the chance." Then he turned to Fan Ruarua and said softly, "Little girl, when you were a baby, I hugged you, and I didn't realize that you've already become a big girl in a flash. There's a good marriage waiting for you in the future." Fan Ruarua was slightly stunned, but didn't know how to reply. The nobleman said this, laughed aloud, seems to be very happy, left the green bamboo on the tea store, get on the car to leave. Carriage left for a long time, the nobleman some out of focus, sighed softly, eyebrows vaguely as if, this night and night to climb the wall of the ability, is somewhat like me back then. In the tea store, Fan Ruarua curiously asked, "Which adult is this? Seems to be familiar with father." Fan Xian at this time finally got rid of from the nervousness, covered in sweat sat down on the stool and said, "Earlier it was His Holiness." "Fuck him, how do you all like to play the trick of microdressing, really think that scaring people to death does not have to pay for their lives?" Once this word is exported, Fan Ruarua is also so shocked that she covers her mouth and calls out. Click. At this time, 10,000 miles of blue sky above, but no reason to ring a thunderbolt, seems to hate to stab into the tea store between the green bamboo, will be childish words of someone live split dead.